let us restart and introduce me. Let me introduce Raphael Tossings, who is a PhD student at both Sorbonne University and Ottawa University in Canada. Their research is mostly concerned with the history of analytic, especially neo-pragmatist philosophy, Wittgenstein, Davidson, Rorty, or Brandom, as well as underlying questions in philosophy of mind or metaphysics. Raphael thesis suggests an original reading of Making It Explicit from Within, insisting on the primary of the first person or conceptual consciousness in Brandom's account of normativity and intentionality. Raphael is also interested in Indian philosophy in the, I won't say which Buddhist tradition, which is in dialogue with analytical philosophy.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for this great conference. We had a lot of interesting conversations. So my talk today is not going to be very technical. I'm not a logician myself. What interests me instead is some metaphysical underlying thesis of the book relating to the question of modalities and what I call essentialism. So what I'm going to argue is that I'm going to explain the resurgence in analytic philosophy of the question of essence. And I'm going to say that Ulf's reading of the formal work done in the book lines up with certain of these views. So I'm going to focus on the conclusion of the book, the speculative synthesis that Ulf suggests at the end. And I'll show that there's a tension between this essentialist view and what I would call an expressivist account of modalities that I will draw out of some of Brandom's texts and the way I read them. So my thesis, very roughly, is going to be that modal distinctions are constitutive of any form of thinking, but that we are free to give different modal articulations to the thoughts we entertain and we exchange. So modal statements, modal discourse don't reflect the structure of the world, but instead the structure of our thoughts. And this is going to be closely related to a view which is pretty radical, which says that our commitments are basic and don't need to be grounded in any form of essence. And so this opposition, which is of course a bit simplistic, between essentialism and anti-essentialism or expressivism, goes with, on the one hand, for essentialist accounts, a descriptive view of modalities and correspondence theory of truth, and for anti-essentialism, an expressivist account of modalities and a more deflationist or semantic conception of truth. So I'm sorry for this PowerPoint. I still need to learn how to make slides in LaTeX. This PowerPoint is going to be ugly. I'm very sorry for that. I know all of you do that very well. I still need to learn. I'm procrastinating doing that, but I'll do it for sure pretty soon. So this is the plan of my presentation. So first, I'd like to do a brief history of essentialism in recent analytic philosophy. So from the modal definition of the essence to the essentialist definition of modalities. So as you all know, except those who are not doing philosophy here, Kripke wrote several proofs of completeness and for possible world semantics in the 60s, And then he gave this famous lecture, Naming and Necessity, in Princeton in the 70s, and which was published 10 years later as a book, which was very influential. So possible word semantics affirm that we can refer to the same object across possible words through direct reference. And this works especially for certain kinds of expressions, so especially proper names and natural kinds. So when I say Aristotle, I am able in this actual world to refer to an individual, and I can imagine in other counterfactual situations what would happen to Aristotle and whether Aristotle would still be identical to himself or not. And if the conditions of identity of the term Aristotle or water are not respected in different counterfactual situations, then the essence of the object is not grasped anymore. So this provides a kind of test to assess whether a property is essential or accidental. If I have a true sentence that turns out to be false in other counterfactual situation about an individual, then this is an ascription of an accidental property, whereas if I have a true sentence that is never defeated, let's say, in other possible worlds, then I grasp the essence of the individual under my scrutiny. So the famous example here is the distinction between Aristotle is a philosopher versus Aristotle is a human being, for instance, or water is drinkable by humans and water is H2O. So I can imagine that Aristotle would still exist in other possible worlds, that he would have the same parents, that he would live in Greece approximately at the same time and so on. But if it turns out that it's not a human being but a chair, then it's not Aristotle anymore. However, it is possible that this Aristotle that we know of could have turned out to not be a philosopher. So this gives a definition of an essential property. So A as F, essentially, if and only if, necessarily, if A exists, A is F, and of accidental properties, A as F accidentally, if A is exists, and if it is possible that A exists and that A is non-F. So for Kripke, this was interpreted as a form of scientific essentialism. So science can provide us access to the structural features, to the essence of the object, the properties that are the reference of our terms. Okay, so this was the original account, and this has been read differently. I might go a bit more quickly on this one, but in Lewis' account of modal realism, we have a way to still explain how propositions which entail each other in our natural language can be accounted for as formally valid, because we can say, for instance, this apple is crimson and tells that this apple is red. This is interpreted as there is no possible world in which this apple is red, but this apple is not. This apple is crimson, but this apple is not red. So we have, for Lewis, we had this way of discharging modal properties by explaining them in terms of quantifications over possible worlds, which was a way to keep this formalist account of validity into place. And of course, this also goes with some properties of logical consequence that are talked about in the book, like monotonicity, transitivity, and containment. Everything can be preserved in this modal metaphysical account. So I lost this. Oh no. So very briefly speaking, some of you are probably already familiar with that, but Kit Fine suggested a criticism of the modal definition of essence, which shows that there are absurd consequences once we endorse that view. So one of them is that it makes the existence of an object a necessary property, and therefore an essential part of its essence. Like basically everything turns out to be God. But the more famous arguments are the followings. So maybe I'll just focus on the second one because it's a bit quicker to explain, but the second one says, it is necessary that Socrates is different from the Eiffel Tower. Therefore, it's necessary that if Socrates exists, then Socrates is different from the Eiffel Tower. So being non-identical with the Eiffel Tower is part of the essence of Socrates, which is pretty absurd because, as you know, the Eiffel Tower didn't exist when Socrates was alive. So this seems rather like an absurd conclusion from the modal definition of essence. And there is also same kind of argument, which uses set theory instead. So if Socrates is a member of the singleton Socrates, this is necessary in virtue of the properties of set theory. And so then it follows that Socrates' essence includes being being part of the singleton Socrates, which is also pretty counterintuitive. So yeah, this, what Kitfine tries to say then is that the essence grounds necessary claims, although it's not true that necessity gives us access to the essence. And so this has given rise recently in analytic metaphysics to certain new research program like the grounding metaphysics and some forms of neo-Aristotelian metaphysics. And that's what I think Ulf Laubil is inspired by, and I'm gonna talk about that. So in the conclusion of the book, Ulf talks about a speculative synthesis of the work that has been done throughout the whole book. And what he means by that is that in the book, we proceed to an analytical reasoning from the non-monotonic multi-succedent sequent calculus to the truth maker semantics, and then to the implication space semantics as different vocabularies, more or less expressively powerful. But we can also go from the sky, let's say, to the ground by explaining it in more speculative terms. And those speculative terms are inspired by Aristotle's reasoning, as he already said in the first lecture 2 days ago. So you have here quotes from Aristotle, where you see that for Aristotle, the form of objects is not in the objects themselves, but in the understanding, in the intellect that think about them. And so that is the object of speculative understanding. So we have this kind of view at the end where we first demonstrated that there is an isomorphism between the expressions in the sequent calculus and expressions in the truth maker semantics. And then we can abstract from this isomorphism the pure form of the rational forms, right? And so in the conclusion, Ulf writes that those rational forms can occur in worldly states or in sentences, that they are individuated by their incompatibility relations, and that they have a negative and a positive pole. And he adds this very important claim, which is that we can combine them into larger unities, into constellations, or media of compatibility or incompatibility. And so the very important claim here, which is a very Aristotelian one, is that objects, properties, or facts are really identical to the occurrence, either positive or negative, of rational forms. So this leads, so this is ugly, but this is a copy paste of some parts of the book. So, but you already know that. So what are those rational forms? they are defined as conceptual content or as implication role with the same range of subjunctive robustness. And so we can define a rational form as the set of its promissory and conclusive role. So for instance, if I have a cat, I can infer from something being a cat that it's an animal, and I can, and some things entail that something is a cat if it has such and such properties, then it's a cat. And if we take all those inferences that constitute the promissory and the conclusive roles, we get a way to identify the same conceptual content, and also the equivalence between several conceptual contents, because if they have exactly the same range of subjunctive robustness, then they're the same rational form. So might have said some imprecise things here. I hope I didn't. So this also goes with a certain view of truth, although this is not present as much in the book itself. In the conclusion, Ulf makes this claim that once we have those implication roles, we can then define the world as an ideal medium. So he writes that an ideal medium can be defined as a medium in which all and only objective rational forms occur, and all occurrences of rational objective forms in the medium are correct, that is, agree with the objective standard of correctness. So the claim being made here, if I understand it properly, is that so we can make a distinction between an ideal and a non-ideal medium. A non-ideal medium is one where some things can be incompatible in the normative sense, incompatible in the alethic sense without being incompatible in the normative sense, whereas the ideal medium is the one where everything can be explained in terms of alethic incompatibility relations. So how this is fleshed out in the account provided by the book and a conclusion? Well, when we can see the occurrence of a rational form, and we see that there is an incompatibility between different rational forms occurring in the same medium, we have to resolve this incompatibility. And if we manage to do so, we have access to the essence of the objects in the world, to say it a bit too simplistically. So we have this very abstract notion of ideal world, which contains rational forms into it, which have certain essential characteristics determined by modal relations of possibility or impossibility. So now I'd like to go to explain briefly how this might be seen as in tension with some parts of Brandam's work on the question of modalities. This might be a bit loose. I hope it's going to produce an interesting conversation, though. So one thing that I take to be crucial in Brandam's account, since making it explicit, is the role that semantic autonomy plays into the account of our thinking. So what I mean by that is that we all have the first personal capacity to institute conceptual content, to transform it, to relinquish it in different contexts. So we are the ones that institute those inferential roles. So for example, I could institute a new inferential role by saying I baptize this piece of desk abracadabra. It's a word that seems to not be understood in terms of any inferential role before that baptism, but once I did it, it is associated with certain inferential content. And then I can refer rigidly to that. I can say this piece of desk was very robust, and so here Brandon would use Kaplan's theory of D-that description. So I can have a description that rigidly identifies a certain object, and it is based on my semantic autonomy, but once I instituted that content, it refers rigidly and certain things apply about it or not. But in the first place, there is this act of free semantic institution. And so one way to see that in terms of the normative bilateralism argued for in the book is that when we say that gamma is a reason for delta, if and only if commitment to accept all the sentences in gamma precludes entitlement to reject the sentences in delta, such as if we do so, we would be out of bounds, as Ripley would say. If we take this definition of what is a reason for what in terms of normative bilateralism, then we would have to say that the commitment to accept the sentences in gamma is based on my first personal authority. Although once I do it, this entails objective consequences. So one example that Brandon takes in making explicit is the fact that once I defined terms like the universe, the mass and collapse, then there is determinate answer about whether the universe is going to collapse on itself because of its mass. But the constitution of those terms is up to me. What is not up to me is what follows from those terms once I instituted them in that way. So I take a lot of views that Brandon has about language as dependent on that. So when he argues for the fact that logic is the organon of semantic self-consciousness, I'm not going to go into all of those details, but if you want a definition of what I meant by autonomy here, Brandon refers to Kant's definition of autonomy as capacity to determine our own rules for ourselves as the only thing that determines ourselves. So yeah, I'm going to skip this. I think that this is also what is implied by the priority of material inferences. So if I have a claim like if it rains, the street will be wet, it is not wrong. It's not an arithmetically a form of argument which would require the addition of a premise such as if it rains, it rains, so the street will be make it into a modus ponens valid form. It is correct in a more basic sense of the term, and it is correct because, as Ulf just said in the previous answer to the talk, the validity of that inference in a way that is distinct from what I can do after that with a formal vocabulary. This is also related to the priority of tokenings or tokens over types. So that might be too much, but in Brandon's account, to identify the same term over different uses, I have to be able to relate it to its anaphoric chain. So for instance, a proper name, in order to understand what this proper name refers to, I have to see all the previous uses of either the same proper name or pronouns of that proper name that can be substituted to each other. And this requires being using language or taking a first personal account of language into account, understanding what the person uttering those things has in mind. Ouais. Oui, merci. Je sais pas si ça marche plus, ça. Oui, c'est exprès, ok. Merci. So I think that's something that's taken into account in the sequent calculus formulation in the book, where we really have the idea that the rules in the sequent calculus have to conserve and respect what is already implied or incompatible in the base vocabulary. And the question here is, what is the base vocabulary? Is it something that we all share, that we all learn, and like, let's say the set of our objective knowledge about the world or something like that? Or can it be framed into a more liberal manner, as, you know, everyone having a different base vocabulary, as I think we should say. And then I think this, so in this context, Ulf writes in this third chapter that we can take the atomic sentences that are taken from the base vocabulary as axioms in the non-monotonic multi-succedent calculus. And so you have this axiom that determines this very important property. So another thing that I would like to point out is that the non-monotonic account of reasoning taken in a more radical way, I think, might undermine certain of the metaphysical consequences that Ulf and sometimes Brandon himself take from those formalizations. So you already know those examples. If we have Tara is a human being, this implies that Tara has a body temperature of 37 degrees. But if we add the premise that Tara has a fever, then this inference is not valid anymore. And same for incompatibility. If we have the figure is a triangle and the sum of the inner angles of this figure is larger than two right angles, this is incompatible. But if we add the premise that this is a spherical triangle, then it turns out to be compatible. So these are examples that are based on very specific expressions, such as natural kinds, like being a human body and what we know about it, or being a certain geometrical figure, right? This also goes into the failure of cautious monotonicity. So people that try to account for monotonicity without being as radical as the usual understanding of it would say we can weaken an implication by adding a premise only if it is already implied by the premise set. And here Brandon says, well, even if we do that, this might affect the validity of our inferences. And he says, which is very important for what I'm set of consequences of a premise set, and that the consequence always depend on the way we choose to make the premise set premises explicit, on the path we choose to follow. And I think that there is a radical element of autonomy in this in the way we make explicit a certain path of explicitation. Okay, and why do I use this as an argument against some of the metaphysical conclusions of the book? Well, I think that if we take non-monotonicity into account, we have to agree with the fact that the inferences that constitute a rational form can always are never complete, in the sense that we should recognize that there is always the possibility that we would add some true sentences that would affect the inferential role of what we are talking about. And I think that's what happens in our epistemic life. We always discover new features of the objects under our scrutiny. We see what happens to them in different contexts that we didn't know before, or under different disciplines, different values, etc. So non-monotonicity is not only a statement about the feasibility and open structure of reasons, but it's also a claim that recognizes that there is no such thing as a set of all the true implications and incompatibility of a claim. Unless, so to be more precise, there is no such thing if we take a sentence as a type that can be repeated and that can be observed third personally. There is such a thing, but only from the first person point of view. So, yeah. I'm not convinced by what I'm saying, but that's fine. That's how it should be, I guess. So, yeah, this is related to other things that I worked on in the past, but that's, I'm not gonna add this because it's gonna make it even more heavy. So now I'd like to explain briefly what Brandon tried to say when he talked about this Kant-Sellars view of modal discourse. And then I'll use some of Amy Thomason's reflections on normative discourse in one of her recent books to highlight what I'm trying to, the direction in which I'm trying to go. So Sellars criticized, in the way Brandon understands it, Sellars saw that in logical empiricism, we had a rejection of modal discourse because of its impossibility, like the impossibility to frame it in descriptive terms. So we can say this patch is red, this is a chair, I observe an electron and so on. But when there is the occurrence into my sentences of modal terms like it is necessary or it is possible, then we don't know what we have to look for, empirically speaking, to determine the conditions of applications of those terms. And so for Sellars, this is based on a confusion between describing something and some expressions playing an expressive role in our language. And so what one is doing when one is using modal expressions is not to describe some features of the world, some properties that are independent from us, but it is to articulate what is constitutive of our thoughts, in the sense that if I think about anything, I have to think about what is possible or necessary about that thing. So to take an example, if I deploy the concept of cat, I have to grasp what would be possible and what would be necessary in certain cases. So if the cat is on the mat, it would still be on the mat if the light was of a different intensity, and it wouldn't be on the mat anymore if there was an asteroid destroying the Earth, and so on and so on. And there is a set of counterfactual inferences that we make with our concepts. So for Brandon, as he reads it, any empirical concept that we might use, whether it's cat, oxygen, any concept we can think about, already implies implicitly certain modal statements about that very concept that are constitutive of its content. So in that sense, modal statements kind of come for free because anything we can think about is already modally articulated in a way we can make explicit because we are the ones that institute the concept, or there is someone that institute the concept and that can make explicit those concepts. So what I interpret here, which is pretty controversial, is that modalities are therefore required for any thought. One must make some counterfactual, robust inferences with the concepts one uses, but there is no finite list of those inferences that we all agree upon. A large amount of those inferences are shared because of good evidence, good reasons we have access to, but we cannot, so to speak, freeze the inferential role of a concept we use in order to determine the essence of the object we're talking about. And I think this might be related to the debate or fight between Jean-Baptiste and Ulf. Maybe what I'm saying in a way would be more compatible with Gerard's account if I had the chance to be smart enough to understand all the details of it. But I don't, so maybe someday I'll have the chance to work more on that. But so this goes also with another thesis, but I don't think that's very important here. Maybe quickly, for Brandon, this involves what he calls modal identity absolutism. And this is also something that could be read in both ways. So I'm not saying that like this is obviously on the side of what I'm saying. This also helps to understand what this notion of range of counterfactual robustness that is used in the book. But I'm trying to say that it could be interpreted into those different metaphysical ways. So the famous example here is whether if I have a bunch of clay and I turn it into a statue of Goliath, whether this is the same thing or not. And of course, there are some counterfactual inferences that are true about one and not about the other concept. So it is true about Goliath that it is true about the clay that it can survive to the destruction of Goliath. But if I turn Goliath into something else, then Goliath disappears. So for this reason, any concept we use is identified through a unique set of counterfactual inferences, and it might pose some difficulties to identify the same concept into different occurrences. Yeah, for a reason I should have explained more, but so this is a bit mean. So this is also based on a certain definition of truth. So in her book, Thomason speaks about this thesis of modal descriptivism about modalities that I already mentioned. And one issue with this account is that it explains what makes our sentences true by using some ontologically mysterious entities, such as truth makers or essences, if you allow me to use that term, as I already do. Yeah, the thing is that this is usually seen as a dominative virtue explanation. So, you know, why does opium make you sleep? Because of its dormitive virtue. So instead of explaining something, I just basically repeated the property as an explanation. So this is something that comes from Davidson, but also from Brandon. If I want to explain what makes my sentence true, what makes P true, I'm always going to repeat P, or to say P is true. P is made true by a truth maker that I'm going to describe in the same way as I describe P, and so on and so on. So the problem here is that we have a notion of truth that is redundant, that doesn't play any explicative role. And so instead, we could use, as Thomason uses in her book, a deflationist account of truth where P is true if and only if P. And the usefulness of this definition comes from the fact that we could have modal claims already contained in our empirical ground level uses of concepts without them requiring some non-linguistic, non-mental thing to be true. So because I explain the truth of P by my asserting of P. where the P in the meta language can either be just a repetition of the sentence or its truth conditions, as Davidson would say. So then the question is, what about necessity? Isn't what I'm saying throwing necessity in a certain way? So in the book, we have an insistence on the fact that sometimes we have persistent implications, so that we can formalize with the diamond of is it diamond? No, it's the square of modal logic. This turnstile arrow for the persistent implication. But here, the interesting thing is that when Ulf and Bob gave example of persistent implications, they use specific examples such as being a bachelor, or if X is the child of Y, then Y is the parent of X. These things are stating the commitments we use, or the rules that we use in the object language. It's and this can be formalized, not formalized, but explained through a strategy that Thomason explains in her book, which is a strategy of semantic descent. So from the fact that bachelor must be used when man is used, I can infer that bachelors must be men, and then I can introduce a modal operator such as necessarily whatever is a bachelor is a man, or even in this context that a bachelor is essentially a man. But that doesn't mean that the institution of this term is also essential in that sense. Because I can always go back to the semantic roles and modify it, or just abandon it for some reason. So Thomason, in that sense, proposes that we could have like introduction role and elimination role for necessity. So if P is an object language expression of a semantic role, use necessarily P. And if you have necessarily P, you may just use P in your reasoning. You can get rid of the necessity operators because they only play the role to make explicit what is the role, but they shouldn't be taken as metaphysical commitment towards something being true essentially or forever and so on. Yeah, in our account, this doesn't imply that we are anti-realist, because once we have established our commitments, when we have make them explicit, when we know what we're talking about, then certain things, as I already said, follow objectively. So there is, in a way, there are things that are essentially true, but it's only when we go to the level of the meta language, so to speak, that we can see that those things could be otherwise and depend on ourselves, on our semantic autonomy. So one worry here is that this view would be considered as a form of conventionalism. The problem with conventionalism is that it explains what's necessary in terms of what's conventional in the linguistic community. And the problem, of course, here is that how something conventional can ground something necessary, which makes, for example, Ted Siler say that the conventionalist view must give up this pretty obvious axiom of modal logic that if P is necessary, then it is necessary that it's necessary in P. Well, what she says about that is that if we have reasons to accept such introduction and elimination rules of necessity, then we can also add the modal operator. because it basically makes explicit that the semantic rule we have for our expressions. Yeah, so what I try to argue, I'm not sure about what that was yet, is that we can give an account of modalities that doesn't assume any metaphysical commitments, such as rational forms existing independently from, I mean, not independently because that would be Platonism, but like that we can abstract from the things in which they occur, because we have model claims insofar as we do have any claims. Insofar as we think about anything, there are model claims that we can make explicit about those things we think about. So this gives kind of I'm not sure what are the consequences if what I'm saying makes sense for the book itself. It might let everything as it is, we can change in a way, or it might require to change some things. I think the only thing that probably is not consistent with what I said is the idea that we could go from the implication space to the normative pragmatic meta vocabulary. I think we should see the pragmatic meta vocabulary as primary in the sense that it is in there that we establish the content of what we think about, and then we can explain it in terms of truth makers or in terms of implication rule. But the pragmatic level takes more into account this autonomy and, as I said, the kind of inexhaustibility of claims that we can add or subtract to our inferences. Well, I think that's all. Thank you very much. So this is the bibliography. And this is a take picture.
Thank you very much very, very interesting. So I just have a few clarification questions, I guess. So the first one is so at some point, if I remember well, you were mentioning or quoting Brandom, and you were talking about a certain form of semantic essentialism. Is that right? Or so I didn't understand that part basically. So you were I think you were quoting from 2008 or something like that. No. Yeah, I mean, if you can go back, I mean, otherwise you can just go back to the if you. Oh, sorry for. Oh yeah. So yeah, so there is, but and so the first thing that so I have the impression that you still want to keep yeah, I think it I think it, yeah, I think it is there, right? Yeah, I think yeah, yeah, exactly, is there. So to deploy the concept, yeah. So these are essential semantic connections among our empirical concepts. That seems to me way too metaphysical. So, yeah, and I want to understand. So, you are trying to deflate claims like this one, right? So, like these are essential semantic connections. So, in your account, this would be more deflated, right? So, if I'm understanding correctly, and another thing that I don't understand. So,
you are quoting Fine's criticism, so but you still want to keep or not a certain notion or idea of essence. So this is something I didn't grasp. So if you could say something more, Amari.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There is, I think what I'm trying to say is that if we take a certain sentence that said someone at some point, we can't specify the essential inferential role of that sentence from outside, from sideways on, if you want, but that person that utters this sentence has access to a specific range of subjunctive robust inferences. So if you ask that person what they mean by what they said, or if you ask specific questions about what they believe about the thing they talk about, then they would make explicit those. But I think that there has to be some counterfactual robust inferences, but it doesn't have to be the same. It would be contradicting this semantic autonomy that I'm trying to talk about. If that, does that help to clarify? Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. So your idea, well, you have lots of ideas, but one of them was that modal vocabulary is to be understood in the realm of expressivism or maybe conventionalism or some sort of, it's in that sphere. And one really helpful way of pinning down exactly what the idea is to think about how your idea gets around sort of stock problems for those ideas. So for instance, often if you present a conventionalist notion of modality, we're asked to think about, imagine the distant past, when there are, the distant history of the earth in which there's no living beings, there's no minds, there's no conventions. But surely in that situation, certain things are possible. After all, our current situation evolved from it, so it's possible. So no expressions, no conventions, things are possible. Okay, objection, possibility can't be grounded in convention, expression, anything like that. And then obviously there are good responses to that kind of thing, but thinking about which particular response we'd like to go for helps to pin down exactly kind of what your idea is, whether it's more like the Thomason one or more of a kind of expressivist one. Or so, yeah, maybe you could just say a bit more about how you would think about tricky situations like that.
So Amy Thomason explicitly considers her view almost identical to the expressivist one. So she quoted Brandom very positively. She says that Brandom is concerned with nomological modalities, not with metaphysical modalities, but I don't think that's very different. But yeah, to respond to your question, that's actually a claim Brandom makes quite often to justify a form of modal realism sometimes. So he says, we can imagine that humans would not exist, and there are things that would still be true. The Earth would still be round, and so on. And I think it's very important to keep intact those counterfactual statements if we don't want to end up in a problematic form of conventionalist view. But yeah, I think that the question is, okay, this would still be true, but do we have access to that truth independently from the thoughts we can entertain in this world where we have this language? And like, yeah, we can say that if we were not there, it would still be the case. but we are always there when we say those things. This is something that Berkeley already said at the time. He said, like, yeah, some people argue that, oh, you're saying that the Earth is, or the moon, I'm not sure, is just a product of our perception. So he says, no, like, we can say that from our actual knowledge that in any situation, if we were to be in certain conditions, we would observe the moon. That's true independently from us, but that still requires us to be able to form those thoughts. I'm not sure this is a convincing answer, but yeah.
Joel Barclay's the way to go here. But maybe it's one way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It goes with a lot of. I'm not saying that I agree with Berkeley and everything, but yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it, and sort of continuing, I think, Mark's question. I think one way to go is usually to say, look, I give you a theory of meaning according to which the sentence, I don't know, 3 million years ago, it was possible that mammals would evolve, or that, I don't know, anything like that, comes out true, or comes out assertable, or comes out, whatever. And then, but that is always kind of, this is like the transparent truth predicate, right? Or the redundancy theory, is where you give the theory from inside. You give a theory of the modal locution from inside, and then you show that actually this comes out in the right way as you wanted. And I think that's good strategy, and I like that. But also, I think it should be complemented from your, as it were, meta perspective, so that ultimately, as it were, what you do, the account you give of the object language locution and what you do in the meta language have to meet at some point to, as it were, be in harmony with one another. And that's where I'm always worried about the expressivists, because, there's, basically I'm thinking, think about the ethical expressivists, and think about creeping minimalism. Especially nowadays that Gibbard and everyone wants to be minimalists about truth, and then they say, yeah, all of these notions are true and so forth. And then it starts to look more and more like, yeah, but you're just a realist. And I think my tendency is to say, yeah, you are just a realist, and I'm just a realist about modalities, and I think Bob should just be a realist about modalities. And yeah, there are these modal properties out there. That doesn't mean that we can still say that the account that we want to give of the semantics takes this certain form. But if that account requires us to give up our realism, I think there's something wrong with that. Especially if the account, as it were, has this creeping minimalism going on that ultimately pushes you towards that. And I think Bob acknowledges that when he says, well, of course, I don't want to deny the claim that, I don't know, 10,000 years ago, it was possible that yada yada. And actually in the book, you see there is, with the notion of truth, something very similar happens. And there is an account of truth that very briefly in there that gives you a transparent truth predicate that is much more like the thing that you wanted with the redundancy account.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I understood that part, because it was you mentioned that quickly.
Yeah, and then there's the stuff that I say about truth in the epilogue. Now, I don't claim that they are in full harmony, but I would, hope I think it would be a fair criticism for you to ask me, well, how do you make these two accounts ultimately really, as it were, fully harmonious? The stuff that you say, as it were, from the meta perspective in the epilogue, and the stuff that you say about the truth predicate in the object language in, I don't know, chapter 5, chapter 4, I don't remember exactly. But so I think that would be a fair question. I would be much more pushed towards the objectivism or realism, or however you want to call that, about these things. Even though I think ultimately the right thing to say is that there should not be that these things, the dichotomy shouldn't make any sense. Like there's, well, we can talk about that some other time. One other thing, I'm also kind of on a mission about the fine essences. I like them, but I also think, so this is just a hobby horse of mine, that I want to point out that it's really Geach. Geach, in whatever happens to the ontologic, has this argument, and the argument is basically, look, it's really bad to make your deontic modality a modality that attaches to propositions. Each's examples are of the form. It can be obligatory that I take you out for dinner without being obligatory that you're taking out for dinner by me, by which I mean it can be obligatory that I take you out for dinner without it being obligatory for you that you let yourself be taken out for dinner by me. But there's only one proposition here, that I take you out for dinner, that could either be obligatory or not. But the obligation, either as it were, attaches to me or it attaches to you. And so if we have the deontic modality to cut only as finely as propositions, we don't get this. We can't carve finely enough. And I take Fine's point in the essences paper to be basically just Geach's point transferred from the deontic modality to the metaphysical modality. And I think in both of these cases, the argument actually works. I think that this is a good argument and that we should accept it. Now, I also think that in the book, the essences that I get there are actually, I mean, you basically think that I have too many essences. I think I don't have enough essences. You know? In some sense, I think I'm not really getting to the Finean essences that I ultimately want, because I only have the essences of the propositions.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I need the essences of the sub-propositional stuff, which we don't have in the book. And I'm hoping to get that in the future. But so in some sense, I want to say, I'm even more radical for the essences than you made me out to be. But I think I don't really see that much of a problem with it.
Well, that's a lot of things. It's hard for me to remember all of them. I'm pretty tired. But just to mention this point of Geach about the deontic modalities, which are not enough to, justify certain statements we take as true. Yeah, I think one thing that strikes me is that when we give examples of modal alethic relations between the objects we talk about, we kind of take the utterances as transparent in a certain sense, but there is always the possibility that certain claims would be added in the context that would make the isomorphism not isomorphic anymore. And so in a sense, I'm not sure about that thesis on. I'm not sure it's very convincing because it would require more argument. But I think that in a way, the pragmatic position one occupies determines what's possible or impossible, whether it's not the opposite, right? So I'm not sure that makes sense, but like I think we have to first know what we're talking about, what we think about, and then there are things that follow necessarily. But there is this first instance of any thought, any sentence that can be interpreted in different ways, can be ambiguous, and that yeah. This is not a good answer, but I don't know. I'm trying to remember what you said as well in the beginning.
So according to that, just Bob often uses the copper example, right? And when he uses the copper example and the melting point of copper, he often says stuff like, we're beholden to the world in our inferential practices. Now, I take it you would say, well, but we first have to, as it were, mean copper by our word copper, and then there's a matter of what follows from that. But there's a question, matter of what follows from that, is that determined, as it were, by the world, or is that determined by us? I think if you mean something by copper, but that does not entail that copper melts at 1083, whatever degrees Celsius, then once you discover that copper does melt at that point, of course you have two options. You can say, well, I actually don't mean copper by copper, right? And I think that's something that you can do. Or you can say, well, then it turns out that I mean this, but then also something actually follows. And that I think is not up to you. I mean, why should that be up to you?
Yeah, for sure.
You discovered it. It's an empirical claim. And that's we find out about the laws of nature in this way. Why, I mean...
Yeah. Burnham sometimes says we can disagree about the laws of nature, but that's not, I don't think that makes much sense. I think we have to distinguish the moment at which we institute a concept, let's say, and what follows from it. So what follows from it is objective, it's the world that makes it such. But so Burnham says, like, it's up to us what our commitments, but it's not up to us what follows from our commitments. That's the way I see it. But I think that even if it's not up to us what follows from a commitment, we can still make, for example, science changes, like we change our scientific theories. So we could, reframe certain things into a broader, theory. So there is always the possibility that we would institute new concepts and abandon the other ones, which is kind of the historical point of view, I guess. But yeah. Yeah, we can talk more about that.
I suggest that we move. We can continue. Later.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said too many things. I tried to finish on time, and I don't think I really did. So
Thank you.